everyone. Hope you had a great summer. I'll share my screen in a bit. I sure had a great summer, and I learned quite a bit since our last user group meeting, so it was difficult to choose what I should show you guys. But since it's been a while, I think you guys learned something a little more challenging to learn, so it will be a little bit more of a technical demonstration today. Before we jump in, again, please note that the following exercises will be ramping up in difficulty, and they require an architect license to perform, and of course, a collaboration license to see and enjoy the results. So I'm going to start with the easiest one first. I'll share my screen here. So this first exercise will be to show you how to hide and make visible different repository objects on the web. So let's say you want to have a certain template viewable in the repository explorer. But right now you can't see it. So let's, for example, create design, and we can see that that one doesn't show up. For those of you who aren't familiar, query designs allow you to, through a visual medium, create SQL or QSQL-based queries called generic queries, which are often the foundation of things like lists or reports. So they are pretty important, and little foreshadowing because we will be looking at those soon. But it doesn't seem like we have query designs here visible. So let's go into QLM and enable it through the HTML Publisher tool. So I'm going to switch over to QLM. All right, so here we are on the HTML Publisher tool. And in the Publisher tool, there's a tab called Repository Explorer. And here's where we define the set of templates to be available in the Repository Explorer search on the web. So if I add query design to it and run a publish, then it should show up, no problem. There's our queues. So if I add query design, apply and publish, and then switch back over to the web. Just give it a quick second. There you go. And I just Control F5 to refresh my page. Now if I go back into the Repository Explorer and I search query design, here we are. So obviously that's how you can do it for the Repository Explorer, but what about the site search, you might ask? So if I go and open up the full text search here and I type in query design, what we can see is that it is visible. Well, the settings for this are not found in QLM, but in the QEF repository administrator. So I'm going to switch to that for a second and show you how to change those full text search settings. So here we are in the repository administrator. Now, most of you may not see this. This is really for technical users. I would just go to the repository, open up the menu here, and go to full text search. And here's where we define which templates are searchable from the full text search on the web. So if I click edit here, oh no, what happened? Okay, brief technical hiccup there. So if I go into the full text search here and click edit, you'll see this list is actually empty. So what that's saying is that you can search every template on that list, or every template available in QLM. You can actually search it through the full text search. But if you were to limit that, so if you wanted to hide query design, you'd have to put the full list of templates, business, process, activity, and continue on with 700 more templates, and then remove query design to actually hide it from that search. And so once you've made these edits and pressed save, you'd go into the service operations and recreate the full text search index. And then all of this has to be done while your repository is offline. So once you're done recreating the full text search index, you'd go and put your repository back online. So yeah, very technical, but now you know how it can be done and where it can be done. And so we will move on to the next exercise, which is making queries.
Can I jump in for one really quick second?
Sure.
Do you want questions in between, or do you want questions at the end?
Sure. Are there any questions so far?
I thought I saw someone's hand raised, so I apologize for interrupting your flow.
Yeah, this was me again.
It was you again. Yes, it was. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just wondering if there was any way of, you said that if you don't want to show the generic query, you need to add all of them and remove generic query from the list.
Query design, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever. Any ways of doing the opposite? I mean, listing the one that you don't want instead? I mean, it seemed counterintuitive to have to add all of the template just to remove one, especially when time comes where QualiWare add a new template, then you need to go back in your, you need to remember, if you want to find it, you need to add it. Versus having, because when you look on the HTML, the template, the publisher, there is an exclude list, right?
Yes.
So where you can actually exclude template versus adding template. Any way of doing it, or any way of asking QualiWare to add that feature?
Right. I can definitely look into it for you. For now, as far as I know, for the full text search part of the functionality, you do just have to add that list. There's no sort of reverse list of things that you want to blacklist from that search. But definitely, I can take that offline and maybe have some answers by the next user group.
I actually already knew the answer, but if you could send that to Sam or QualiWare as a feature request,
sure,
it would be great.
Sure thing. Great. Any other questions?
Thanks, Dragos. You can keep going. I'll let you know if anybody puts their hand up.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thanks.
All right. So our next exercise, making queries about you, because who doesn't love having inquiries about them? Okay. So the next exercise will show you how to make QRVs and generic queries on the web filtered to the viewer. So let's say that you're a contributing member of a repository and you have a number of objects tied to your name. Let's say maybe you're a troublemaker like myself and you have a number of nonconformances. So I'm going to go here into the QRV for managing nonconformances. It's going to show me all of the nonconformances available. And I could see myself in the responsible in quite a few places, but not, not as neatly as I would like. That's a little frustrating. Geez, I mean, I wish there was a way to make it easy for myself and my coworkers to see only their own items when they visit this list. Well, worry not, I will show you exactly how to do that. And I'm not just talking about, adding a filter for your name, because that's a temporary solution and that doesn't apply to everyone. We want to make sure that everybody, when they visit this QRV, that they only see objects related to themselves. So to make this happen, we will go over into QLM. I'm just going to switch over. And we'll go over to the Manage Nonconformances QRV. And what is inside a query result view? Pop quiz for you guys. Anyone? What's inside a QRV, a query result view? What can you always find?
There's a pop quiz. I didn't know there was going to be a quiz.
What's the question?
What can you always find inside a query result view, a QRV?
Conditions.
Close. Queries.
Yeah, well, it's the name, right?
Yeah. Or generic queries, as the technical name would have it. So here's our, our SQL sort of syntax query for manage nonconformances for that list we just looked at. And so this generates that list, and that's all great. But actually, sorry, this generates that list. I was playing with it earlier. But what we want to do is we want to filter it by the user. So how do we do that? Well, we want our where. And then Where does my name show up? Well, it shows up in the has responsible field. So to1.has responsible. And what attribute do I want from that? I want the name. So where my name equals, and here's our bread and butter. So LM script ID equals current user name. And what this will do is it'll filter the list that we just looked at to where has responsible, which is the responsible attribute, is an object with my name. So this QLM script ID equals current username will output your name, right? So with this, we can filter by name, but what if, for example, I'm not tied to those objects by my name, but I'm tied to those objects because I'm in a position, like let's say in the responsible is enterprise architect, and the enterprise architect object has my name in there as a position holder. So for example, we look at this position object here, we can see that the position holders are a number of individuals. And to figure out what is the name of that field, I would go to, so make sure this is my active window, go to File, List, and we can see that the attribute actually being used for these position holders is called has position holder. So coming back to our query, if I wanted to add a filter for this as well, I would go OR, and then take everything that's here. And I would say instead of the has responsible name, what's inside the object that's inside the has responsible, we want the attribute called has position holder dot name. So we want the name of the object that's inside has position holder, and that object inside has responsible, which is part of our query. So in doing this, I go to hit preview. We should find stuff with only my name. And I'm going to hop over to the web to show you guys what this looks like as well. So I'd already created a separate QRV here. Called it manage my nonconformances. And here we can see that the responsible is only set to my name. All right. And also important to know is that anybody that visits this QRV, the filter will change to whatever their username is. So it'll be relevant to them. So that's it for this exercise.
Sorry,
Yep.
I didn't raise my hand, but does that work well in 10.3? Because I don't have good experience displaying a generic query using a QRV.
You don't have a good experience displaying a generic query using
No,
QRV.
it's either not displaying anything, even though the query itself returns results,
Right.
or it's in a table format that does not look as great as this one, and where you cannot put filter and visualize and all that nice feature.
I mean, it is a bit of a separate conversation. Like to get it to look like it would look in the generic query, there's some formatting that you got to play with in your file. So maybe we can take this question offline.
No. What I want is my HTML query result view to look like yours.
Right.
In 10.3 using a generic query.
Okay, and you're saying the appearance of it is different.
Yes.
Right. Well, I can't speak to the appearance, but I do know as far as actually writing in the query, it shouldn't be any difference between 10.3 and 10.5, but I can't speak for the visual side of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Nope, there doesn't seem to be anything else, Dragos. You can continue.
All right, so our last exercise is called hiding buttons on diagrams, and is about obviously hiding buttons on diagrams, and it's meant to demonstrate in the grander scheme of things how you can make changes to code in QualiWare in a relatively risk-free manner. So usually to make changes to code, you need to tamper with files on the back end of QualiWare and its root directory. But with this approach, you can take whatever you need from those files, take whatever code you need, and put it into QLM and modify it and run it into your repository locally. So very small repercussions. So I'm just going to switch to QLM. 1 second. Okay, that's strange.
So
Yes?
can I ask out of the D&D people to take the following presentation, well, what's coming in, with a grain of salt? Because we don't like people playing with the code and adding features, especially when there's lots of people accessing the same repository in the same private workspace. Sometimes it might cause some behavior that are unexpected. And when it comes to our desk, because something is not working as it's used to, it might save us time if people don't play with QCL and code and all that. That's all I have.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that warning. So let's imagine you have a diagram and perhaps you have buttons on the business processes, and perhaps you have too many of a specific kind of button like we have here. We have too many regulations tied to these business process objects. So ideally, I mean, we would limit the buttons, but that's not really possible, given what code is available right now. But we can definitely hide those buttons, or at least certain buttons. So to remove buttons, in this case regulations, we would go into the backend. But first, maybe it's useful to gain a bit of an understanding as to how these are linked, how these regulations are linked to these business process objects. So if I open up the properties here and I go into associate and then I go into compliance, you'll see here that this compliance with field is how these regulation objects are tied to it. So if I go into the backend and I'm looking for code that's responsible for the button panel here, probably I would want to be removing something to do with the compliance with field. So I'm just going to switch my view here. I'm going to go into the backend and show you just very briefly what that looks like. So here we are. I have Notepad++ open, and we want to use it to find in the backend what code is responsible for this button panel. Luckily, I already have that function, which I need, which is called it's called get generic buttpan. So we're going to be taking that little piece of code and searching for any file that contains it in the QualiWare root directory. So for me, that's C program files, QualiWare, QEF/modules/QLM. So I'd be looking up get generic buttpan to see if there are any hits in those files. And I do have some hits here, and it turns out that it's in the erm.qcl file. So now that I've found the code that I need to change, what do I need to do? Well, here's the fun part. Any QCL code that's found in QCL files like this one can be entirely copy-pasted into QLM into what's called a QualiWare setup file. And you're going to run that from QLM instead. So if that code is in QLM in a QualiWare setup file, it's going to run from there instead of the backend. So whatever modifications you make through the QualiWare setup file will stick, but will not touch the backend, but will run separately. So I'll show you how to do that. But before I switch back to QLM, just a quick bit on this function. So I'm not gonna describe everything that it does, but it is looking for to create buttons for where we specify that there's objects in certain fields. So in our case, we have compliance with, So it stands to reason that if I remove this little blip here, current instance compliance with, then our buttons won't show. So let's see what that looks like in QLM. So usually I would take all of this code, Control A, Control C, then switch back to QLM. Okay. And in here, we would go to, in the repository, we would go to QualiWare setup objects and create a new one. I've already created a new one here, and I've pasted the code in. So there's nothing else done to it aside from that. I just pasted the code in. And now I'm going to find my bit of code using Control F. So get generic buttpan. I have it typed out here, business process : get generic buttpan. So if I search that, I'm going to find the same piece of code we were looking at earlier. And we're going to go into where it said compliance with. I'm just going to remove this little bit. And the only thing you need to do for the code to take effect is press apply and run it. If you don't press run, it's not going to run until the next time somebody launches the repository. So now it's in operation. I've pressed run. So what you have to do here on the diagram itself is press F5. What that does is it redraws all the elements on the diagram. So if I press F5, now as you can clearly see, it looks a lot cleaner. All of those regulation objects are gone. And in fact, what if I want just this diagram to be without the regulation buttons, I could go ahead and publish this diagram and then go back into my QualiWare setup and remove the code or remove the QualiWare setup object that we just created altogether. And what that's going to ensure is that this published diagram will not have the buttons, but everything else in the repository won't be affected. So that is everything that I had to show you guys. To summarize our session, we went over how to hide and show templates on the web, both in the Repository Explorer and in the full text search. We learned about how to filter queries to the current user. And last, we learned about how to make how to safely make customizations to QualiWare code without any sort of long-term repercussions. And yeah, any questions?
So I do have a comment again, again for people at D&D and or whoever would be interested in. At D&D, what we did on the button panel is we introduce a configure button panel. So when you right click on an object like a business process, you have option to hide all the button or configure the button. So then you can click on it and then decide which field you want on the button. So if you want to remove the strategic alignment and the external document, but you want to have the breakdown too, well, then you can configure it so that on that particular diagram, it will show only those buttons, and that will not affect diagrams on other diagram or the same object, not the same object, well, yes, the same object as well on other diagram. So it really on a diagram level only configuration of the button.
Well, that's fantastic. Maybe you can share that with me, and
Sure.
I can present it next time around.
Sounds like I found my trade.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think Dan was interested in that too. I do have to say, and I know it's probably not it's a joke in poor taste, but Dragos and I did laugh about buttpan. I have to,
Yeah.
I have to say that.
So I will share the code with Dragos, and then from there you can
Sure.
send it to whoever's asking for it.
That's
Awesome.
great.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you. Thank you, Dragos. You learned a lot. You were busy over the summer.
I was.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Dragos? I know some of that was a little over the average users, someone just going into QualiWare on a casual basis, but James is also interested in a copy. Absolutely, James, not a problem. Any questions, any comments before we wrap up for today's session? We've gone over by just a couple of minutes, but we certainly can stay for a little bit longer if anybody has any questions.
I think maybe just, I really love the presentation, Dragos. I think my comment would be your filters that you put in your generic query could live and sit in your query design. So that way, every time you rerun your query design, you'd lose those settings of your filter. So put that into the query design and you won't lose it anymore.
There you go. Excellent advice from Jay.
And I noticed in 10.4, our relationships always had to be a join. So from one box to another, they'd always go to a subquery. In 10.4, if I wanted to put those into a query design, I'd always have to put it to a join. In 10.5, there's benefits in not doing that. You really want to leave it as a subquery. So it's going to really mess us up in our queries when we migrate from 10.4 to 10.5, because a lot of our queries were changed to joins. And now I'm seeing the benefits of not doing joins. You can do other things in 10.5. So heads up. But thank you for the demo. It was really good.
Thank you.